I pay a salute and tribute to those of you that actually can digest more. I hope I will be as brief as possible. Actually, in my country, we was changing from the left side to the right side, 1967. I was a part of that. And we didn't start by trucks. We got it all together, and that was a very collective maneuver from a very collective country. I would say that this would have been impossible in any country in these days, but we achieved it. And it was Mr. Olof Palme that actually was the conductor of this, going from the left side to the right side. I think that was the only thing actually in his political history that he went from the left side to the right side. So we are, in some areas, actually, we are also a bit European. As has been stated here this day, I think globalization is under fire. And Rainer has been a bit provocative, and I might be a provocative from another point of view. I do think that we all can recall and admit that we know that an independent global economy with free trade is essential for freedom, democracy, wealth, and prosperity. I think we all can agree on this, the measures, but how to reach this goal. And I do think that we can also agree on nationalism and isolation is the worst enemies to liberal values. But as some of you have stated, they are there now. And how to deal with these ghosts. We have it currently a discussion all over Europe and especially in the European Union concerning TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the most important trade agreement globally, whatever. And there are such a criticism on this from countries like Germany, my own, because they say that free trade is bad. And why do we have to follow the US? They are worse in almost everything. And that's very strange that sometimes it turns up that Europe has the best measures, the values in all over Europe, all over the world, but we cannot adopt anything that comes from the US. And I would say that some of us would say that we are adopting too much from the US in many perspectives. And I think it has also been said that market economy is not a Wild West capitalism with everyone on themselves, on their own. I think we need to admit that as liberals. On the contrary, for me, a decent market economy includes liberal values as fair distribution of wealth, an inclusive and egalitarian policy for all. It's a bit tricky to use this egalitarian. It's from the French Revolution, and as you know, Chow En-lai said that, speaking to Nixon in the 70s, that you don't know the result of the French Revolution. It's too soon to tell. But egalitarian, I think, even for a liberal, even for me, I'm a very true-oriented, market-oriented liberal. I think that's essential. And I would especially point out that we have to include the whole society, everyone. And in these days, I would say to the panel here, cherchez la femme. Where are the women? This is a perspective all over Europe. And I think we need to change that. Absolutely. And also, those that are coming to Europe in these days, the immigrants, the integration. I'm coming from a small city where 35% of the population is immigrants. They're immigrants. We thought that we could solve these problems very easily, but we couldn't. I'm a fan of the US. I've always admired the United States and the American dream. It helped millions of European immigrants to build a future in the United States in the 19th century. From all our countries. My country was 25% of the population left because of poverty in those days. However, coming from a Nordic country, and perhaps we can have some agreements here later on, I also believe in a broader perspective of inclusion. And that goes especially concerning globalization. For me, the conservatives, they have neither the ideas nor the social inclusive perspective. The socialists, someone has said this earlier, they always tend to call for a stronger state that solves all the problems. We know that that's not true. I think we could look more on Lord Dahrendorf expressing changes of life. I think that's a very good expression. With a social and inclusive way of giving citizens a decent life. Some could call it social liberalism or whatever. And I think this is essential to point out. And as I said in the beginning, for me, a decent society where responsible citizens can never be sustainable without democracy, tolerance, and freedom of speech. And this is not just words that we are saying. I think history shows that we actually are right. And I do think that we have to have some common understanding from a liberal perspective to deal with these challenges. As you heard, I'm from a small country up in the north, and where we cherish pragmatism and consensus. We did our wars 300 years ago. Now we have not done them. And we were that close to a Swedish revolution, 1917. But there was a policeman outside the parliament. He just marched. There was an ordinary policeman. He said, no, we cannot shoot on our own people. And instead they got voting rights for all the citizens. We have to, as liberals, fight for full protection of all human rights. And I think we have to remain in the forefront of fighting discrimination of any kind, even though that it can be tough, and even though that perhaps some of our voters are in some ways saying you are going too fast or so whatever. Civil liberties, and that has been said earlier, are the very foundation of our wealth, and we need to defend them when they are threatened. And I do think they are threatened now. Some concrete conclusions from my viewpoint. Open and tolerant societies are more successful in creating jobs and wealth. Free trade, open borders, less regulation, and inclusive policy in all areas. A firm belief in market economy with the knowledge that it is business, small companies, we haven't mentioned a lot about that, that is the cornerstone for economic prosperity in creating jobs. Stability within the economic and financial sector, and here we need a global approach. In this sense, we need regulations. I've been dealing with this for almost 15 years in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. In the beginning, we were saluting the banks, and we had this very loose financial regulation, and in the end, we regulated everything, every identity. In some areas, I think the pendulum is always swinging too fast. Enough is enough. Business need also freedom to expand and grow, and I think all these regulation introduction now is actually a problem for the real economy. A modern education system where innovation and entrepreneurship are in the forefront, supporting IT and R&D, protecting private property, of course. And then, Mr. Professor, I come to a sensitive issue here. I can understand your viewpoint, but I think taxes can also be beneficiary. A fair distribution of wealth, a stable welfare state, if I dare to mention this in a liberal context, and I do that, with decent conditions for everyone, which includes a fair tax, a tax system that also can meet the global competition. We cannot in these days, and I think it was here in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but even Mr. Osborne, this conservative Minister of Finance, they were all agreeing that tax havens cannot be tolerated. Someone has to pay taxes. And of course, this especially after the financial crisis from 2008. In my country, we have always been paying high taxes. We are competing on day-to-day basis with Denmark. But I think the new Swedish government will actually overturn Denmark very soon. I don't know if you recall Astrid Lindgren, one of our famous authors. She wrote many loving books. Pippi Longstocking is one of them. And at that time, I think it was 76, she paid 102% in taxes. The Social Democratic Minister of Finance, he said in Parliament that this is impossible. But she, as a very good author, she said, no, Mr. Finance Minister, it is not impossible. We can do that. Liberals also need to have, and we here, to have a balanced answer on and I think it was Jonas who mentioned it, on climate challenges. And I think that is a part why, and me myself, I'm rather poor in this area. I think that's why we have lost the deal. The Greens, they are more popular because we have left those issues to them. And we also have to deal with the lack of energy. The energy sources. I also would conclude by mentioning global poverty. That's why I started in politics in whatever, 67 or it's a long time ago. In the middle of nowhere in Sweden, I said that it cannot be so that black people in Africa is having less human rights than I have. So I do think that the MDGs, the Millennium Goals, they should be actually fulfilled 2015, but they are not. To meet all these difficult challenges, we also need to be alert on the fundamental global threats on liberal values. And it has been mentioned, but I do think it's a disaster that 200,000 people have been killed. And it's a disaster that Mr. Putin has blocked everything in concerning Syria. We could say that ISIS and IS is a result of this. We don't know that, but we have to deal with it. And therefore I would be provocative in that sense that soft power is good, but soft power, as we call it in the EU, is not enough. Sometimes we need to have other ways of defending the core values. And we could not say, and there I will end, Mr. Chairman, we could say that these are liberal values, but we could also say it's universal values. And sometimes I think, to answer the question, why are we not gaining in the elections? Perhaps we have too many victories. In some of the European countries, or if you ask a broad majority, do you feel as a liberal? They would answer yes, we are liberal. But probably they don't vote for a liberal party. There are exceptions. There are exceptions. But I think perhaps we have been too successful in implementing our values, and they are now recognized as universal values. But I'm an optimist, and I do think that being a liberal, Mr. Chairman, it's more or less compulsory to be an optimist. And I'm an optimist concerning Russia as well. And I think you will make it. Thank you.
Спасибо.